Welcome to the Microdosing for Healing podcast. I'm your host, Casey Garrett, and together we'll be discovering and learning from inspiring voices of healers, medicine keepers, and visionaries. Every episode, we'll explore the world of health, vibrant wellness, and natural medicine for a new era of human society. Welcome to today's episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Microdosing for Healing podcast. Today, I'm really excited to be with Micah Stover to celebrate and honor her brand new book, Healing Psychedelics. So she has been working on this for, I believe, close to a decade, right, Micah? Mm-hmm. So I'm really excited to support her and share her with you all as she brings her baby, one of her babies, into the world this month, actually. So please welcome Micah Stover.
Oh, so what a lovely introduction. And thank you so much just for having me back. I'm really glad to be here and for just celebrating my book and that lovely sisterhood of support. I so appreciate it. It has been a long gestation period for this one, but also perfect, just what it needed to be. But it feels all kinds of feelings to be at this particular place in the journey.
I know a lot of people listening feel like they have a book in them or they're in progress for a book. So I'm sure everybody's nodding their heads right now and understanding. Well, I'm so excited to dive in more deeply to some of the topics you're very passionate about and that you speak to in the book. And I wanted to allow for ample time to go super deep. So let's dive in. One of the topics that I would love for you to share about, and it's a very controversial topic. Everybody has an opinion about it. And it's women, psychedelics, and motherhood. So I get asked a lot, how I feel about this way. And I know for myself, I don't have children of my own, but I know in my heart now, if I were to have a baby, I feel intuitively like there is few things that one can do to prepare the body, the soul, and the heart for mothering than healing, right? It's one of the best investments we can possibly make in preparation for becoming a mother to me. So I would love for you to share your journey, your experience. I know motherhood has been an immense part of your own personal story. So I just love to give you the floor to go into depth and detail of your background, your experience, and how you feel about this subject at this stage.
Well, this is probably one of my most favorite topics to talk about. So thank you for just the opportunity and the space to talk about something so near and dear to me. And really, it was my children who brought me to this body of work. I mean, I suppose I could say my karma, my ancestry brought me to this work, and that would also be true. But this particular chapter of the journey that I'm in now began after the birth of my oldest son. So I talk about this in the book, but just for listeners who don't know me or haven't heard anything, I'll share a little snippet of that story. So I started trying to get pregnant when I was around 34 going on 35. And up to that point, I had a pretty traumatic youth and had a severe eating disorder when I was younger, but then moved to China. In some ways, we might say I ran away from my trauma, and that seemed to work pretty well. And then I came back to the States and landed in Portland. And as soon as I got kind of settled in to my life in Portland, I had like a quote unquote successful career and things were going. And I thought I was doing great. And so really, up to that point, I wasn't so sure that I wanted to have kids because my childhood had been so complicated. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to know how to do this right. But when I first decided I wanted to be a mom, like for sure, I had a dream of my oldest son. And in the dream, he sort of appeared to me from far away and I couldn't really see him clearly. He looked kind of like an apparition. And my sense was like, in the dream that I know this person. So I said, I feel like I know you? How can I help you? And he was like, we do know each other, but yeah, I don't need your help. I'm actually here to help you. And I'm here to help you finish all the things that are not complete, which is incredible to think about now. Because I think at the time, and this is just so telling of how much I still needed to heal, it was like, oh, I'm going to have the son and we're going to love each other so much. And it's going to picture, picnics and everything cliche, but beautiful about my still younger romanticized mind of what this would mean. So fast forward, attempting to get pregnant, despite I think 34, 35 is not really that old. It's a decade later now, so I definitely feel still pretty healthy and vital, but I was told that I had infertility issues and that, I had waited quite some time to conceive. And so the sort of the indirect implicit message was like, you put your career first and now, this is just what happens. And I remember that feeling of being so devastated that I'd been doing what culture told me, be successful, be independent, get to financial stability, all these things, and then do it. And now my body wasn't ready to cooperate. So I think that was the beginning of returning to what was stored in my body that really needed, which is a lot of intergenerational trauma that needed to be dealt with. So I ended up having one round of fertility drugs and I got pregnant. And from the moment of pregnancy, alongside being very excited, I started to have complications. So I had hyperemesis, I had a vanishing twin, I had 2 placental abruptions and developed preeclampsia. All of that can happen in one pregnancy. Most of it happened in the first 25 weeks. And so by the time we were at 26 weeks, they were like, you're going to stay in the hospital. And so from 26 weeks into 33 weeks, when my son was born, because my preeclampsia could have been fatal had they not taken him out, we were in the hospital together. And for listeners who've been in the hospital, if you've been in the hospital, it is not the most restorative, calm environment to be in. And this was like the opposite of how I'd envisioned. Flashback to that dream. Like, this is not what I thought. But the way that things only make sense looking back, I understand how all of that was part of helping me finish certain cycles, which is no longer running from the trauma stored inside. So when he was born, that really was the beginning of what felt like to me. One of the things I'm trained in is internal family systems. And so I think a lot about all these parts that are inside me and how there's no shortage of parts. And the one that I became acutely aware of after my son was born was what I call the epigenetic guard. And I had never met a part stronger than the eating disorder part, which felt like ancient history by the time in remission. I don't know that those things ever go away entirely, but I'm not living from that anymore. But this epigenetic guard part was like maybe bigger and stronger than even this anorexic part of my past. And it was like relentless, doesn't want to sleep, doesn't want to eat, doesn't want to do anything other than obsessively watch my son to make sure that he's okay. Anyway, somehow in the midst of all of that, in the wee hours of not sleeping, it kept coming up, this like messages about psychedelic healing. And everything in my conditioning was like, that is not what a new mother of a baby that just went through all of this is going to do right now. But also something deep inside my soul was like, this is the only thing that can help. So that was really the beginning of returning, is how I think of it, to psychedelics, because psychedelics had helped me at another point much younger in my life, though it was a limited extent and not in a therapeutic setting. I do think it changed the trajectory for me. But this was like a homecoming. And the difference in that pregnancy and the getting pregnant and the being pregnant and the birth could not have possibly been more different than my second child, who was after some of this healing had begun. And just to give the Cliff Notes version of that pregnancy, I was told, don't have more kids. And certainly you are way too high risk to ever consider having a natural birth. That would be a disaster. So we thought, well, we really want to try. Well, let's see what happens, but we better start soon because it took forever the last time. I literally got pregnant the first time we tried. No fertility drugs, no fertility issues. And that was, I think, it even gives me goosebumps thinking about it now, because I do really remember thinking, maybe my body is not broken. Because maybe my body is not the problem. Maybe I'm not somehow infertile. Like, that's such a loaded thing to say to a woman, right? And so that pregnancy was smooth sailing, no complications. I delivered in a birth center. I had no medical interventions. They couldn't have possibly been more different, and yet both of them so incredibly instructive. And I do attribute so much of the change from the first pregnancy journey and the second one. And people ask me, are you saying that psilocybin cured your fertility? Part of me is saying yes. I don't want to be so bold because I'm one anecdotal case. Whilst I also would say, I think we have research that's happening now and data that's emerging to back this up. But if we consider the correlation between physiological expressions and root causes being trauma, that I can't really say that I blame my youngest child for not wanting to go through the part of me and out the part of me that was still holding so much trauma. Right? So that's already a long story for me, but maybe I'll stop there. Thank you for such a juicy question.
No, thank you so much. And I know that's going to be so meaningful to so many listeners hearing this. It reminded me of when I had my healing art studios. The foundation of our work was somatic healing, lots of body work, energy work, somatic healing. And we would see so many women come in who were told, you waited too long, you put your career first, and exactly what you just said. And they had not yet done the healing work. They were carrying so much trauma that they had run from, become workaholics, high achieving people. And they were treated, well, why can't I achieve this? And it was so beautiful to watch them. They were trying all these different things and fertility, but really what helped them the most was coming home to themselves, coming home to their bodies, relaxing their nervous system, and starting to unwind and unpeel and release a lot of these layers of trauma. And then it was almost became effortless and natural. Yes. And so, it makes so much sense in hindsight, right? It's natural, but we live in such an unnatural time and such highly conditioned time. So thank you so much. My next question has come up a lot recently in the last 6 months in our programs, where I've supported a lot of people who have lost a child. And we all, it's part of life. We all lose people, but there's something inordinately tender to lose a child. And so it's been really tender, but also really breathtaking to watch their healing journey through grief and loss with mushroom practice. So I would love to, I know this is another topic that you talk about and are passionate about. So I would love for you to talk about your own journey with grief and loss and how psilocybin has assisted you.
Yes, I do love this question also. And gosh, there's nothing quite like losing a child. I mean, as you said, loss of anyone that we love is so hard, but it's when it's your child and you are the carrier of the baby and you just feel that there's so much responsibility that you take with that. And, you know, I recently shared about the experience that I think has taken me now. So my oldest son is the one who had a vanishing twin. He will be 9 in March. And, you know, the vanishing twin happened so early that the message I got in the hospital was almost like, that doesn't matter. You need to just focus on making sure that this baby makes it. And I mean, I want to try to extend some grace because I don't think they were all wrong. Like I needed to really focus on taking care of myself because we were precarious. So I think that was the best core truth of what they meant. And also, well, I should back up to say in many medicinal experiences throughout this past 8 years, and also in dreams, not even necessarily isolated to medicinal experiences, but in altered states of consciousness, we might say this baby spirit that I lost, this twin that vanished was like, oh no, I'm still here. Like I am in your field. And that gave me a lot of peace around like, oh, okay, so there's still this connection. And so I would just say on the one hand, like that these tools I think are so helpful for helping us understand the veil between this concrete world and the spirit side are actually way more thin than we necessarily understand. And that there are these ways to commune with spirit. And I think that can be incredibly healing for someone who's lost someone that's dear to them. Then I had a very unexpected experience that's really sort of started the beginning of this year, which has been a very spicy year for me. It was, I think, January 3rd, and I had scheduled a ketamine session. And I had told my therapist, who I had very close maternal transferential dynamic with, that like there's something still in there about my first pregnancy that I feel like I just can't relax as much as I want with my oldest son. I'm still like hyper fixated on his safety. And so I was like, I want to explore this in a session. And she said, well, you know, we can't control where we go, which of course I know. And also, sure, I'm happy to hold that space for you. So I went in expecting to do more work around my son. And that is not what happened at all. What happened was, I mean, you can say it was the pregnancy with my son, but this whole medicinal session was about like the exact experience, the moment when it happened, the moment of losing that vanishing twin and actually feeling it happen through my body. Like the moment, like what it felt like is like if someone was holding a hand, we let go. And the spirit let go and I let go. And whatever was the fragility of that holding on in that cycle, let go. And it expressed itself in physical form as blood. And so the way I felt in the medicine session was looking at this blood and feeling this like this strange collision of happiness because blood is life, like it's the sign of life. But also the medical response to it was to like mop it. Like then I saw the mop coming in and the kind of chaos that created in my inner world of how are you treating this so devoid of sacred anything? Like this is now a hazardous scene and we're all, you know, catastrophizing. So anyways, it was incredibly healing for me to actually feel like I got to grieve this thing that at the time there was no space to grieve. And some of that was, again, because I think the message was there's nothing to grieve here, when in fact there was. And also, there wasn't a lot of space to grieve because I was still fighting for my life and the baby that was inside. So I guess the message in all of that is that grief is its own psychedelic thing. It does not happen in linear time. And the most painful parts of what we're facing in that grief also, I think when we can allow ourselves with the right support to feel that pain, actually gives opening to more love, to new growth.
Thank you for sharing so much. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so beautiful. I'm thinking of seeing so many faces of people in our community. And it's interesting. It's the, as you said, it's nonlinear. It's never how you would expect. And it's always simultaneous. So many people who have experienced such grief and catharsis and tears, and they're just crying and crying and crying. And they're like, I thought I was over this years ago, but I'm clearly not. And it's simultaneous as they're having this catharsis. They'll also say, I'm starting to feel my son again. I'm starting to see feathers that are connected to him wherever I go. There's these signs that are here. And so it's really, it's tender, but it's also so beautiful because you get to see them come back into wholeness and know that this being is always around and is always part of you. Yeah.
Yes. And I think I love that you said that, because let me see if I can, it's so abstract, but it's also so important, the nuance in all of this. Like a mother and a child are actually like one organism for the time that child is growing inside. Like there's research to show how our cells as mothers change because of the cells of our kids that are growing inside. And so when we lose a child, it's like, I think it is like our DNA is scrambling and it's so disorienting. And that point that you're saying about how when we reconnect with what was lost, there's like suddenly, even though it's so crushing, it's like, oh my God, I feel more alive. Like that was the thing I kept saying in that session, is like, oh my God, I feel this is so much more real. Like I feel more alive now. It was something about facing the loss that almost gave me more of myself back. It did help me connect. It was like everything that was dislocated, dismembered somehow kind of took its form again, or took a new form, and things felt so much more whole.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And you just had a baby girl.
I did. Yeah.
Take us through that.
Well, so this little baby spirit that I keep talking about, this vanishing twin that was like, no, I'm not gone. I'm here. She was with me through the first installation. She really was like with me every time I did ceremony work. I could feel her so strong. And then she was like, I want to be like with you when you're holding the space. So then I could feel her like before something significant would happen in a person's ceremony, I could kind of feel like there was certain little body sensations that were like her signature. She's here. Okay. And then when I was at many junctures, when I was like, I can't write a book. I have 2 kids and a lot going on. She was like, no, I'm going to help you write the book. Like I'll be your muse. And so, I guess about 4 months before that particular session in which I really experienced the loss of her, I handed in my book to the publisher. And it is very much, for me, it's a practice that when I complete something that was like a big labor of love, I like to have a ceremony to sort of like honor that body of work and like make my space between the egoic I of that project and now what is going to be in the world. It doesn't belong to me anymore. So I went into the ceremony with those intentions in mind, and very much unexpectedly, this little spirit came through, but with this new message that now I'm ready to have a human body now. And I was kind of like, oh God, I am 45 now, which I still want to be clear, I don't think is too old, but also wasn't necessarily anticipating doing that through my body. And so as I'm sort of processing all of this, the picture was like, no, not through your body. And also maybe that's the point, is that love is not just about something that is sharing an epigenetic gene pool. Love is about conscious choice. Love is about, blending things together. And so I saw this whole scene in which there was like some other woman, and she was having a baby, and she was in tears, and I asked her, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" And she was like, "I'm very much in love. I'm not in danger, but this baby is not for me. And I need to find the right home for her." And she had lost someone that she loved. That was what she told me in this whole vision. And so there's an interesting evolution of things. So then we started talking about what would it be like to adopt? I wonder about that. So we started looking into it, and we live in Mexico, which is a wonderful place to be. And it is also complicated as people who are not from Mexico to adopt. So we were very clear that we didn't want to make it like that was clear in my ceremony. This is not a mission. I'll just come to you. I've never not been with you. And so we were just sort of talking to people who worked in that world and who might know people. And in January, I had that very intense experience where I feel like I released so much grief. And then in August of this year, one of the organizations that we had spoken with about maybe adopting just contacted us and said, we have a very sort of rare situation where a child who was, because usually you wait years. I mean, this is very common. And that was fine. We were just going to go on about our journey. That's what we were doing. And so anyways, the short version of the story is that this particular baby who was supposed to be adopted by another couple, and for reasons not fully disclosed to me, that couple had at the very last minute sort of panicked and decided they couldn't move forward. And meanwhile, the biological mother was going into labor. And so they were like, if we don't find a home for this baby, like no pressure, but we know you really wanted to adopt and you're here in Mexico, because it can be complicated to adopt and then go back to the States. You need 2 to 3 months to be here, but we live here. So this was like 2 p.m. on August 7th. And my husband and I were like, well, let us talk about it and then we'll let you know. And so we talked about it, and with our kids, because they're young, but old enough, I feel, to be appropriately included. And everyone was like, this just feels like meant to be. So we said, okay, we'll do it. And a few hours later, they called and said, she's going into labor. If you would like to be there, you are welcome. And the first thing I thought when I walked into the room is like, oh my God, it's that woman from the ceremony. Like immediately the sense of, I know you. And it was, I don't know, it's ineffable, truly ineffable. So I had the incredible opportunity to be in the room, to catch her, when she came out. And yeah, so now she's part of our little tribe.
Oh, I'm so happy for you. So beautiful and so inspiring. And yeah, so true. Like every time we create space and heal, what is meant for us can come in. That's so, so
Yes.
beautiful. Love it. Mm,
Hmm.
the book. So I
Hmm.
would love because I know you've been working on this for some time. And I've
Mm-hmm.
talked with you about it in the past. And I know I know a big part of what drew you to write it is really all of what we talked about so far. This work is so tender and it's so
Hmm.
profound and it's so sacred. And over the past years, I mean, you called it, we have to continue to hold and revere it and respect it in such a way that is representative of the work that we're doing
Mm-hmm.
in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't always happen. And we're
Mm-hmm.
hearing more and more and more instances of it not happening. And
Mm-hmm.
so harm reduction is such a limiting term, I think, as
Mm-hmm.
to what this topic actually is. So I would love for you to talk about that, how you feel about that, where we are present day in the psychedelic field around that. Um,
Mm.
and yeah, how I know you hold your work and teach a lot and educate others around this topic. So I'd love to give you space to reflect on this.
Yes, thank you. And it feels like a question of great gravity because there I don't even know where to begin. I mean, maybe I'll begin with the title of the book, which is Healing Psychedelics. And I chose that title very intentionally because I feel like there's a lot of work to do to heal the kind of appropriated, colonized landscape that is the modern day psychedelic movement. Um, and that also we can, in fact, heal through psychedelics. But part of doing that, I think, is one, we have to find some balanced space where we understand and are accounting of the understanding that we have through modern science and research, wisdom around what happens in people's brains and in their psyches when they have complex trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. How does that change their tendencies towards attachment and so on and so forth? But also, I think we have to be so careful to remember that, especially if we're talking about plant medicines, like these these medicines come from long lineages of working way outside of a clinical context in which there was like a strong village model of support and these kind of core values and guiding principles like reciprocity and right relationship. There was a strong presence of rituals to hold life together, and I think as we see things become more and more above ground, there's certainly parts of me that want to be very cautiously optimistic about it. Like, what do I hope in that? We destigmatize this so more people feel it's accessible. What worries me is it actually going to be accessible? Or are the costs going to become so high that people who need it most still are reaching? And also, what about the indigenous holders? Are they being taken care of in all of this? Like, there's so many layers. It really does feel like an onion here. And that's without even touching on, you mentioned this term harm reduction, which I do feel like, God, can we sum it up in harm reduction? I mean, I don't know. Like, there's a chapter in the book dedicated to a young woman who is no longer Earthside, who was violated in this space and guided into that by the person who was facilitating. And this happens way, way too much. And so just we have a lot of work to do. And I think part of the clinical response to that is to implement protocols and implement structure so that we can have like not this Wild West underground scene. So you see, my conundrum is that I understand really what is motivating all the parties to want to do all the things. And I think that everybody's a little bit right. And I'm curious about what does the future of this look like where everybody's rightness is reflected? You know, meaning that we have protocols and we have structure so that those people that need that to feel safe, it's available, but we're not overly rigid. And we're also considering, rituals and some of these more esoteric things. We're talking in our practice and we're building our practices with practice of reciprocity and right relationship. Like I'm really interested in exploring the hybrid.
Beautiful. Yes. Yes, it is a conundrum because you can see if you're working in the space, you can absolutely see all sides. You can see the perspective of all sides. One thing I have been trying to do in my own in a little corner is I don't think we have been listening enough or inviting enough of many of the medicine keepers, predominantly women, who have been doing this work for 30, 40, 50, 60 years with great results that no one has heard of. And so listening, finding them, platforming them, giving them voice on par with many of the people who have been in the space for about 5 minutes.
Yes.
Right. Right. And so I think there's so much wisdom there, but they're not the people they're so focused on the work itself.
Yes.
That they're not looking for attention or approval or, to be most popular. Right. But they have so much to share. And so I think everybody benefits by listening to the wisdom of the people who have been doing the work and how they've been doing the work without causing harm for many, many decades. Yeah.
Yes. I think this is so important. I was invited to teach a class recently, and one of the things that came up in the class is like, where can we find out more about these ancient approaches? And it was such a good and honest question, and also so reflective of this thing that you're talking about, which is that, most of the curanderos and curanderas that I know here, they don't have websites, they don't have books, doesn't mean there aren't books living inside them. Oh my God, the stories they can tell. And also they are just so humble-hearted and doing their work. Like you were saying, they're not thinking about getting any messages out. They're living. They are the message. The message is how they live. It's the vibration that they move through life with. And so my answer to that, when I was posed that question, was to say this, and to also say, I think it's really important that we, especially if we're moving into these spaces to hold space for people, and we're working with some of these sacred plant medicines that have these indigenous roots, that we travel to the places where they come from, that we study with people who have held them in their lineage for a long time, so that we, not to colonize or appropriate, but so that we're not doing that, so that we are truly understanding like the spirit, the frequency, the vibration that they're bringing to this body of work. I think that all of that is so important. As somebody, I also, just one last thought on this is like, I saw a post recently on, I think it was on Instagram, but it said something along the lines of, there isn't a psychedelic movement really without the indigenous people, and I think especially if we're talking about plant spirits, that's absolutely true. MDMA and ketamine are also psychedelic entheogenic medicines, but different in nature. Anyways, the point is really to say it has to be inclusive. The conversation, the future of this conversation, I think must be inclusive.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah. And I think for my learning, what I have learned from studying, reading, my own spirit guide has taught me much in this realm of ancient tradition and indigenous tradition is it's not just the human, right? It's so much to do with the land and the presence and the vibration and the clarity of energy. It's not just how much someone knows and how much information they have memorized in the holding of these medicines. And I feel like this shift is happening where people are starting to realize it's not just how much you know, because that's what we've focused on for the past 40 years. And here we are, yet here we are, right? So there's far, far more to holding the medicines than just the molecule and converting it into a pill. Yeah, absolutely.
Totally. I mean, I think so 2 thoughts on that. One is that you mentioned the land, and I am blown away by the land here and the potency of the earth here. Certainly that has been healing in so many ways for me. And I thought in the beginning, I thought, well, that's me. I'm connecting to the land. I grew up on a farm. That was the earth has always been medicine to me in some form or fashion, but it's not me. I'm not unique in this, because every person that has come for a deep sort of immersive retreat, at the end, when we're like synthesizing and talking about takeaways and learnings and what was not a surprise and what was a surprise, almost every single time, every single person is like, this is a place. It was being here. There was something about being here, and not even because it's escaping whatever is stressful at home, but it's everything about, like you were saying, the vibration of here. Nothing happens fast here. There's not a lot of urgency. There's different kinds, but generally speaking, people are slow and open, like they move slow through life, because what's the rush? Might as well enjoy this meal instead of just utilitarian consuming. And also generally, I feel like people lead from the heart here, where often, as you said, it's like from the head, and the head can do great things, but not when compared to the heart.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I would love for you to share some of your thoughts around rites of passage. So one of the things I have seen in working with people for over the decades is, particularly with women, these things tend to come up, ready or not, around certain ages, right? And I don't think it's a coincidence. It is the ages and the moments in our lives we most malign. It's around our cycle and our luteal phase. We malign that, but things come up like that. It's an exceptionally potent time. Being a teenager, our Saturn return, becoming a mom for the first time, perimenopause and menopause, especially. I work with a lot of women moving into their menopause years, and it just seems like if you have not dealt with something, now's the time, maybe. Like whatever roots are still down there, like it's time to weed. We're weeding together. And so I look at these moments in a woman's life, and I see so much richness and so much power in these portals that women go through. Yet I see so much fear around them. And I see so many women too perpetuating
Afraid.
fears around it. So I'm so curious to ask you your thoughts on what you've witnessed working with people through these moments.
Oh gosh, I love this question. And I do think like you and I feel like we talked about this before a little bit, this concept of the patriarchalized feminine, which is like, I think, I mean, how to put it just bluntly, I think women are really powerful. And I don't mean that in some ego trip. I just mean it like we are the bringers of life. We are the conduit from which a spirit comes from wherever they come into this earth and arrive. And I think that, the whole modern era and all of science and like, I think, therefore I am, like all of these big men and their big ideas, there was so much catastrophizing that got ascribed to being a woman. And again, I think it's like it wasn't totally unfounded because let's use birth as an example. In older times, birth could be very dangerous. Like if what happened to me in my first pregnancy happened, 20, 30 years before, the odds of me dying are high. So I'm not trying to bastardize the Western medical movement, but I'm trying to suggest this idea that the pendulum swings, right? So we went from like whatever sort of primal state to like figuring everything out. And then everything that can't be figured out somehow as a problem is a catastrophe. And I think that many women, including younger versions of myself, were very sort of patriarchalized in this sense of how I experience the regular cycles of my body as somehow being problematic. Like, let me use an example. This is going to be a little bit graphic, but trying to illustrate a point. I've always been a woman, even as a young woman, who bleeds a lot when it's time. And my whole life, that was like a cause for concern. Not necessarily, I mean, I just took on the concerns of those around me, leading to me having a surgery when I was like, I think 20, 21, because they were convinced they needed to figure out like what is going on there. She bleeds too much. I will not ever forget what it was like maybe 6 to 12 months after we moved here. I was having one of those cycles where I had an inordinate amount of blood. Bleeding is a theme of my life. Bled a lot during my pregnancy, all these blood. Anyways, this curandera, who I treasured dearly, came to my house, and because they were convinced we need to give you a hysterectomy. And I was convinced if I have to, I don't, but what else can we do? So she's like, I'm coming, where they're not taking your parts. And so she came to the house and she said, what if you just, instead of seeing this as like, maybe you're going to die, maybe there's a problem, what if you thought of this as your superpower? What if you, and she wasn't being cavalier. It wasn't like a message of like, just bleed out and we'll hope that you bleed out in your superpower. It was more of like, what if part of what is causing all of this to be so volatile is that you're not really in touch with what's happening here? And so then she went on to say that, from her perspective, many women who were healers have this tendency, like a strong capacity to bleed, to cry, to do all kinds of things through their bodies because we are like powerhouse filters. And that about blew my mind, but also maybe changed my life because I stopped seeing these things that my body wants to do as like, oh, scary. Oh no, it's happening again. But more of like, wonder what I'm filtering, and also I have great healers and practitioners who can help me. We slowed the bleeding down, but a lot of it was at a root level, I think, was understanding what was really going on instead of catastrophizing my body. I want to share one other thing that's very personal, but I feel like, that maybe this will be resonant for people in your community. So circle back to that 35-year-old girl who was told she was infertile and basically had screwed it up. You got it wrong. You focused too much on your career. Yay, you're successful, but now your fertility's all dried up. There was so much shame in that, like more than I even realized at the time. So after that healing ceremony that we were talking about earlier, and this idea that I might have a baby, I thought, I just wonder what is the state of things, like from a fertility standpoint. So I went to see a doctor here. I found a good doctor that my healer friends approved of and wasn't going to be too extreme in any one angle. And she did a whole exam. And the snapshot of my anatomical alignment at 45 looks younger and more fertile than it did at 34. So what I want to say in this, not to make it about me, but hopefully I can be like an example and that others can believe our body is regenerative. It is so powerful. And so it's like that great line from Hafiz, the words we speak it becomes the house in which we live. So if I see myself as infertile, if I take on those projections of others, then I become my body starts to present with these ailments. But if I see myself as vibrant and as becoming more vibrant and potent through each of these stages, and so then people might say, so at menopause, are you losing your vibrancy? No, you don't even need to bleed anymore because you've learned it all. You're just full crone status. What would that be like for women to be sort of restored from this land of appearance and trying to counter time to just seeing this as a beautiful evolution? I would love that for all of us.
Love it. Thank you. Mm-hmm. I would love to open my next question for you by sharing a story.
Please.
And this has come up, I can't tell you how many times in our community, where women who grew up in evangelical families, mm-hmm. and they have just tried so hard their entire life to be a good girl, to do everything right, self-sacrificed in every way in their career and their family as a parent. And they get summoned to mushroom practice in a way they can't explain. They're like, it just keeps calling me, and they don't live in places too where it's around them. Like they know something is up. And while they're clearly intuitively drawn to it, this conditioning in them is like this voice, like, this is not good for you. This is bad. Jesus doesn't approve, God doesn't approve. And so oftentimes they have, when they're first starting, it's something they have to work with, this overcoming this voice. And what I've noticed, one particular story that's representative of so many women's stories that I've seen, is this woman started, and she's in her powerful crone years, and she starts mushroom practice, and she immediately start to have these spiritual gifts start to pop open, and her dream life comes online. And she had a very powerful dream early on where she had her home, and it was neatly kept, perfectly adorned and decorated. And all of a sudden, wild animals. She came home and there were wild animals all in her house, like roaming around inside her perfectly adorned house. And one animal in particular was a wolf. And the wolf came up to her, and she was scared at first, but then the wolf took her arm in its mouth and just held it there.
Wow.
And she brought this dream to the group in one of our group programs. And I brought tears to my eyes immediately, because I just knew it was this wild, natural side of herself that was coming back online. And she was remembering who she was. And in particular, my puppy's at my feet, and I got to raise him. I got him at 8 weeks. He was just a tiny, tiny baby. And I remember I let him sleep with me, for better or for worse, from 8 weeks. And I would wake up sometimes and his little mouth would be holding my wrist. And I asked his vet what that is, and she said it's puppies and it's mothers. That's how they hold each other and they comfort each other, is by holding their mouth. And so in this dream, this wolf was holding her in its power.
Wow.
So that's beautiful and absolutely affirming. So I know that you too grew up in an evangelical home. A lot of this overstory. So I would love for you, just because it comes up very, very often, and particularly now with the political climate in the United States, the way it is, that I feel like this is really activated in women right now. So I'd love for you to share your reflections on this for women.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that story. That's amazing. How beautiful. And I have so many thoughts in response to that. I mean, first of all, I'll just share that I think that this piece about returning to the wild, part 3 of the book is actually called The Wisdom of the Wild. And that was something said to me in ceremony, to me, I often experience the medicine as like, this is the Earth Mother, and she's telling me what I need to do. And the message was, you need to return to the wisdom of the wild. Like, you need to remember that you are an animal. And in my world order, your village is like not so hierarchical, where you human animals are so superior. Like, check out the horses, check out the dogs, check out the dolphins. They actually know a thing or two, and so there's just so much there in terms of just acknowledging this. There's so much wisdom to returning to our wild primal nature. And I think it's not surprising to me that a lot of times when people do medicine work, they see a lot of wisdom reflected through signs and symbols in nature and animals and things like this. So that I wanted to acknowledge. And I also wanted to say, yes, I grew up in a crushingly evangelical state. And I think that there's hardly enough space to say enough about what that can do to women and men, girls and boys, in terms of how they orient towards themselves. Like, since we've been talking about bleeding and the cycles, I'll just say, like, for me, growing up in that evangelical world, the message was, we, meaning girls and women, are daughters of Eve. And Eve, what was her big crime? She was curious. How dare she be curious? So that's, first of all, at a root level, what we're working to repair, that we are safe to be curious, right? So safe to be curious, safe to want the wild, to want to know about it, to make friends with it, all of that. And then, so along those lines, because Eve had been bad, according to this whack narrative, that all of us would be punished, and that punishment would be expressed through the pain of our cycle and through the pain of childbirth. So when I think about retracing my trauma and how things unfolded for me, also this like relationship of fear and terror to my body bleeding, this like really traumatizing pregnancy experience, is all sort of at the hands of that grand narrative that made me have this core, that instilled in me, I should say, a core belief that I would be punished through my body in these ways. And I think that there are so many of us women, even though we intellectually, like I was intellectually beyond that for a long time. Even 34-year-old me that was infertile knew that that was not really the truth. But I think our bodies hold it in a different way, because it's all scary when you're little. It's ominous. So I have so much empathy for the women in your community who are coming with this, because it's a beast. I mean, I'm like a decade into this journey, and it will still show up as like, oh yeah, that's still like over there in that corner. There's a little remnant hanging out, you know? It is a very strong program.
Thank you so much. Can you share a little bit about your experience working with psilocybin specifically? Most of my listeners are starting. I have lots of beginners in our community who are brand new to mushroom practice. Mm-hmm. I would love to hear. You've supported many, 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 many people. Mm-hmm. And lots of people in my community are starting to microdose in preparation for higher dose, deeper, more intensive work. Mm-hmm. I'd love to open up the floor to you to share things in terms of when you are intent and you know that's in your future. In addition to microdosing and connecting with the medicine, what are some of the other things that you have found are really, really supportive in preparing someone for an ultimate ceremonial experience?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that come to mind. And one is, like, generally speaking, when I think about ceremony, I think of ceremony as like, it's a prayer. It's a long 6 to 8 hour prayer. And so it's a conversation that you get to have with Source, God, Earth, Mother, however you think of that universal presence. And so in preparing for that long conversation, I like to enter in feeling like, because I always think about it in terms of reciprocity. What are my offerings that I'm bringing to that prayer? Like, this is what I am working on. This is what I'm trying to do. This is what how I want to serve, for example. And then and here are the questions on my heart. Here are the things that that are like, I don't know, I'm looking for help tuning inside myself. Like, for example, how do I make peace? I'm working to make peace with this loss. Can you help me? I mean, so many of my ceremonies where the baby spirit came through, that was the thing I was asking for. Is like, can you help me find peace with this? And then through the prayer, there's chances to intermingle with the spirit, so to speak. So that's one way to think of it. The other way to think of it is, and this may seem sort of silly, but that's okay. I love recommending people watch or rewatch Moana as like a great guide to this journey. So let's unpack it. Moana has a calling inside her. She knows there's something calling to her that she needs. She doesn't understand it. She just knows it's there, right? That's like her intuition, we would say. And some of her ancestors are like, don't do that. We don't want that for you. She has at least one benevolent ancestor that's like, you go, you do that. And she doesn't even really know exactly what it is, but she has this general sense, right? So then she tries to prepare herself. She gets her little boat. She brings her little buddies. Like, this is, I think, a great metaphor for how we prepare for ceremony. And also, I love this too, is that even though she tries to prepare, even though she's got conviction, even though all these things, she struggles. The journey to where she's going is not easy. There are times when she has a fit and like, what? Like, it's so cute. The fish peeing here. I hope like she's got all of these. This is such a beautiful rendering of what a psychedelic journey is like. And so I think just having that as a kind of, this is sort of an arc of a journey, not that any two are the same, but it almost certainly always begins, or I think should begin, with a call, like a true sense in your heart. You're probably going to be pushing against some forces that feel scary to push against. I bet certainly somewhere in the system, there's somebody who's rooting for you and encouraging you. You can, just like if you were going to go on any quest, you can pack a bag so you've got some provisions. And even still, you're going to meet things that you're not prepared for, that will make you want to give up, that will challenge the heck out of you. And you might have moments where you think you do give up. And then that calling inside, if it's really true for you, will continue to pull you forward.
I love that. Beyond.
Mm-hmm.
So beautiful. So I love, in closing, to ask each of my guests, in your heart of hearts, no barriers, no restrictions, just present day. You can wave a wand. It's your design. Mm-hmm. How would you envision, again, no restrictions, bringing earth medicine, plant medicines to people's lives in a way that is safe, sustainable, and effective?
It's such a good question. If I had a wand and I could wave it, and I may have said this to some degree before, but some aspects of it are evolving and some just are constant and true. Like, I like to envision some future where these medicines are destigmatized. Like, we don't have to feel like, oh, somebody might think I'm crazy or gone rogue because I'm doing this. So one is like that we have a medicine cabinet as a family, and that inside the medicine cabinet, there's all the tools that can help us. Like, I do think that sometimes progress is going backwards, going back home. So it's like, in the olden days, all they used were the plants. So I want the plants to be back in the apothecary as safe, as supported. I also think, gosh, if I could wave a magic wand, I'd love to have some, I don't know, summit of elders where the elders on the clinical side and the elders in the indigenous lands from all the different places could come together and not just be like, oh, well, you got a ticket, you got a seat, but actually everybody gets a chance to speak what their medicine is, so that we really truly have a chance not to just look like we're being inclusive, but to collaborate together. I think the other thing I've been thinking a lot about lately is just how do we, and this is related to the plants, but maybe in a slightly indirect way, is how do we start incorporating consciousness into our education, like into whatever we do to raise up this next generation? Because I don't think it's any secret. There's a lot wrong right now. If we look at the environment, if we look at the socio-political things, we need help. And so sometimes as a mother of young ones, this makes me feel like, oh, we're leaving them with a lot. And also it makes me feel a sense of how are all the ways I can equip them to be stewards. And I think part of it, to something you said at the beginning, is like the more I heal, the better for them. So that's the part that I can really do. I also really think there's an opportunity to be innovating now with how we shift the education. I don't even want to use the word system because systems usually get broken, but like I would love to envision some sort of curriculum where kids are taught about herbalism, where kids are taught about their intuition, where kids are taught about meditating, about crystals, about stones. Like that really makes me feel hopeful for the future.
Gorgeous. All of it. Thank you so much. Your book, where can folks find it? I know it's fresh out of the oven in November, right? So is it going to be on your website? Is that the best place for people to go?
So people can actually pre-order it anytime. And by November, it will be available in print and also in audio. So you could go to Amazon, you could go to Barnes & Noble or any other places where books are sold. You can also get information on my website for sure, but there's lots of places to find it. And people can find me always at my website, which is Micah Stover Consulting. And you can find me on Instagram at Micah Sugarfoot. And I always welcome people reaching out, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and talk and share.
We're so happy to have you. Thank you. Thank you so deeply for your beautiful work you're doing. Really
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. I really, really appreciate each and every one of you, and we'll look forward to seeing you back in just a couple weeks. Have a great day. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Microdosing for Healing podcast. Are you ready to take the next step? Please visit us at microdosingforhealing.com to access our free Microdosing 101 workshop. In it, you'll learn more about our diverse community, our supportive group programs, and discover if earth medicine practice might be right for you. See you in the next episode.